welcome everyone to Being Patient's live talk. This is Nicholas Chan, reporter with Being Patient, and today we'll be speaking with Joe Brazeal, author of Living with Thunder, Alzheimer's Untold, a family's journey about, and we'll be speaking with Joe about his family's experience navigating his late wife, Kimberly's diagnosis of Alzheimer's and terminal lung cancer. And she was diagnosed at the age of 48 and passed away in 2017 at the age of 57. So thank you, Joe, for joining us.
My pleasure.
So Joe, you mentioned in the book that, it was a lead up of, 6 years before her diagnosis. And after that, that was another 10-year journey, right? That's a long time period. And but before, we talk about that, can you tell us a little bit about, your family, including yourself, Kimberly, and your 3 children, about, tell us about a little bit about the family.
Okay, we have a very close-knit family, I guess, because of this. My wife was very beautiful physically, mentally, and spiritually. She really was. If you ever watch I Love Lucy, that's her. She's pretty much like Lucille Ball, and had a great sense of humor. We laughed all the time. We had 3 children. We have 3 children. John is the youngest, and he's now 23. Joseph is the middle child. He's 28, and Carrie is 30 now. And they all are were affected by this disease, and they'll tell you right off it caused a lot of anxiety for them, but we all survived it. Her nickname was self-anointed by herself as Mother Love. So we all referred to her as Mother Love. She was just quite an interesting character and quite fun to be around.
Mm-hmm. Right. And yeah, like you mentioned, right, like, her symptoms that really, and her diagnosis really had a big effect on the whole family, right? And for the children, because they were very young at the time when, her symptoms began to appear, right? So Joe, can you tell us, a little bit about, some of those early symptoms that Kimberly began to experience, and at what age and what year did that start to occur?
John was born in 98, and I believe that it started in about 2002 is whenever I say it started getting kind of ramping up, if you would. She started out with headaches, excruciating headaches. They just wouldn't go away. She would go to every doctor in town, and they prescribed her these medications from Zoloft to you name it, and it just wouldn't touch it. And of course, if you think about the disease, it's basically your brain is dissolving, and it's within its own skull. What's happening is slowly being eaten away like a peeling an onion. So she had these headaches, and she would self-medicate. And alcohol is one of the few things that will go right through the brain barrier, and it didn't help with the self-medication. So the first telltale sign was excruciating headaches and the self-medication. And then, of course, she started forgetting things. She would drive up. John was in elementary school. She would drive up at 10 o'clock in the morning in the lane to wait for the children and get out of school. And it would be 4 hours later, and she would just sit there. And then as soon as she got the children picked up, she would take them up to Asher Dairy Bar, which is like a little Dairy Queen. And before she did that, she'd write a $20 check every day. And she'd never tell me about, so there was a lot of financial stress involved in our marriage. I didn't know anything about it. And before too long, we were like $20,000 in debt. So and we fought all the time. It was horrible because by the time she would self-medicate, it would get toward the evening, and she didn't get intoxicated, but when you mix it with other medications, it didn't have a good turnout. And I believe anytime you self-medicate, it's sort of like rushing on the DNA markers for this disease. And I would advise anybody not to drink alcohol at all, especially with any kind of medications. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but those were And of course, the questions after question after question, she would ask me like, "Are you going to work today?" And then she would ask, "Did you have work today? Are you going to work?" On and on and on, at least 100 questions every 30 seconds, it seems like at times.
Right. And that must have been really tough for you and the children, not knowing truly what was going on, right? Your children were young at the time, and you're working too, right? Like
Oh
that.
yeah, I was working at the time, and she would do things like smoke a cigarette after cigarette after cigarette. It wasn't the Alzheimer's that killed her. It was the behavior caused by the Alzheimer's. She couldn't remember the last one. And I got her on every program you could think of to get her off the cigarettes, and it didn't work. And I mean, even at the end, she would just find a cigarette. So one of the stories that I have in the book is when we moved here to Mississippi, our church was about 6 miles away. And we would drive to church, and one of the things that stopped it finally was that any light that we would come up upon, she would open the door and see if she could find a cigarette on the ground, just get out of the car. Or if we go to Walmart, if somebody threw a cigarette down, she'd pick it up and start smoking. So there was a lot of those kind of things which caused my children a lot of anxiety and embarrassment. But at some point, it's nonchalant to you. Just water like on a cat's back, because it just rolls off, duck's back, it just rolls off.
Right. And at the same time, right, like Kimberly's mom in 2003 was in a nursing home. She had Alzheimer's, and that was also really tough for the family too, right? There was can you tell us a little bit about
Yeah,
that?
I'll tell you a little bit about that. It's very interesting. There's all kind of theories about what causes Alzheimer's, and I'll tell you this, that I think it's everybody. There is a propensity to have that DNA factor in your body. Okay. Now, what triggers that DNA factor is a number of things. Her mother, when she was younger, during the World War II years, her father mined cinnabar out of the Ouachita Mountains in Arkansas. I write about all this in the book. And she cleaned the cinnabar, which is raw mercury. They put them in the bombs to make the nose of the bombs go straight down with her bare hands. So I think she got a dose of that heavy metal in her body. And then when Kim was born, being the firstborn, it went through the placenta, and she got the heavy dose. She has a sister. Also, this was in the area of Murfreesboro, Arkansas. There's lots of people in that area, hereditary, and Glenn Campbell was our neighbor, which was was interesting. But the thing is that her mother and her had some of the similarities. In some cases, it makes people very angry. People want to know, what are the different phases? Some say there's 7, some say there's 3. Do they occur in order, in chronological? Okay, the first stage is where you just mildly forget something. And so some of the things that you'll do is try to cover it up. Eventually, you'll learn how to forget how to use a microwave, and that'll make you angry. Because, I mean, if you can't remember what a coffee cup is, but you know it's there, then you have internal anxiety over that. And so as far as her mother was in a home, and I believe Kim's self-medication propelled the DNA markers on. Whether she would have got Alzheimer's later in her life, I don't know, but I think the alcohol abuse and the medication certainly did that.
Right. And you mentioned that, at that point, when Kimberly's mother, was in a nursing home and had Alzheimer's, like Kimberly was very detached from, the decision making about like her mother's situation, right? Can you?
Yes, she was very close to her mother, and stress has a lot to do with propelling the DNA markers or propelling this disease forward. When Kim was beginning her journey, as I mentioned earlier, my children were more or less, when we were living in Little Rock, a target for Department of Human Services. They were watching her because she was doing those kind of crazy things. And I talk about some episodes that went on, and she got very depressed because DHS eventually took her teaching certificate. She was educated and had a certificate, a bachelor's in children's education. But when they took that from her, it just made it worse. And she got very depressed and very closed to herself. And of course, when you're going through this disease, I believe you naturally have depression going on because you just don't know how to function. Could you really imagine what it would be like to just start forgetting your long-term and even short-term memory? Just it would just be a horrible thing. I think it's the most, it's a robbery in progress is what Alzheimer's is.
Right. And now fast forward to, 2008, right? That was the year when, you received news from the doctors at Arkansas, right after a family vacation about, her Alzheimer's as well as her cancer, right? And yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about, that whole process and how you received the news from the doctors? And
Well, we went to doctor after doctor after doctor, and finally we were, it was a combination of a medical doctor at St. Vincent's in Little Rock. It was a whole staff of doctors there that were trying to figure out what was going on with her. And we finally went to a psychiatrist and blood work. So it was a combination of everything. They did not do a lumbar puncture there to check the cerebral spinal fluid at that point, but they had enough evidence to know that it was something was going on. In 2008, I had an opportunity to move. My employer needed a data center set up here in Jackson. I had an opportunity to move to Jackson. The other thing that was pressuring me was Department of Human Services had already taken our children out of school, my two boys, and threatened to take them from us. And that was starting up again. And I go into that in my book a little bit more. And the doctors at the time, I asked them, should I move? And they said, yeah, maybe that will affect her memory and maybe she'll get better. So we did. And then in the middle of December, we moved from Little Rock to here in Brandon. I had no family, nobody. But when we moved here, we set up with the doctor, Dr. Ruth Fredericks, and she did initial tests, and didn't think anything was wrong with Kimberly. Because when you saw her outward appearance was, this is a beautiful lady, 42 years old. Well, 48 years old at the time. There's nothing wrong with her. So we went to the hospital and they did a test of this cerebral spinal fluid. Of course, the lung cancer was already in progress. Okay, we already knew about that, and it was just a matter of time. But she wouldn't quit smoking. We were in this hospital, and she smoked there, and then drove the nurses and doctors. And the next morning, the Dr. Ruth Fredericks, in madder than you can imagine, and threw us out of the hospital. Said, well, I'm not going to have you as my patient. I said, I'm not leaving unless you give us this help. So they committed Kim to a 2-week stint at St. Dominic's Hospital in Jackson. And that's when they officially diagnosed her and got her on medications. Now, this is up to that point. This woman, you could tell we were driving down the highway because there'd be a whole stream of smoke coming out of our car because of her smoking. And it was just chaos with question after question after question. And so after the 2-week stint, she got on medication. That really made a difference. It really gave me a respite. So I would advise anybody to get some help from the doctors and get on the right medication to help cope with this.
Right. And yeah, can you tell us a little bit about then how your 3 children, reacted to the news of
I wrote some notes down. How they reacted to it varied because we're talking about essentially a 15-year process. So when it first started up, it was, I didn't recognize it. She wasn't checking homework. She was stay-at-home mom at the time. So the children changed. They evolved like anybody else. They're opportunists. Later in life, I found out that it's kind of funny if you think about it. It's teenagers, you know, you go to the parties and that kind of stuff. So they would convince, my children's friends would convince her to take them to parties around Little Rock when it started. Then later when we got to Brandon, we lived out in the country. So the children would trade her, say, we'll get you some cigarettes if you buy some beer. So that changed them. The anxiety level goes from 0 to off the charts with children. I have a very large burden for what I call the children of the lost. In today's society, I don't think that the counselors at school are really getting down to understanding what's going home, the problems at home. For example, my son was in 9th grade, and I'm a kind of an activist type person. And so I set up a meeting at the church, the same church that we had gone to, and for Alzheimer's, and people from all over Mississippi, Hattiesburg, Vicksburg showed up. But the night before, I got a call from Joseph's teacher saying that he was sleeping in class. And I said, well, I'll take care of it the next day, because you have to juggle a lot of cats when you're dealing with this disease in children. And after the meeting, I got a tap on the shoulder from an older lady that said, I understand. And I turned around, it was Joseph's teacher. She showed up. And she explained that she didn't realize that Joseph wasn't playing video games all night. He was worried about his mother. One of the things I did is would get them in counseling, but the thing to do is talk to your children. It's very important to talk to your children. So some of them have such anxiety that they tend to go down the path of the least resistance. What I mean by that is, in John's case, when your wife, you pull up in the church parking lot and she gets out and honestly urinates in the church parking lot, kids can be cruel. So John took a lot of kidding and bullying by other children about his mother being crazy. So what does that do? It caused him to fight, caused him to get into fights, caused him to not want to go to school. Instead of counselors getting together and saying, hey, you know, let's have a program, let's do some in-service with our teachers, and let's identify some of these children that are having problems in school. Not that they have any mental problems, but maybe they have some anxiety due to having to deal with a terminal parent or something at home that they don't really want to discuss. Who wants to talk about their parent like that? Remember, this is not a mental disease, it's a physiological disease.
Right, yeah. In your book, you mentioned about an event that you organize with the local chapter, local Alzheimer's Association chapter, about early onset Alzheimer's, right? And near the end of the event, your son's teacher came up to you and said, you know, and she was the teacher who called
Right,
you,
that's right.
said your son like wasn't paying attention in class. But after hearing your story at that event, right, she came and talked to you and said, like, I understand what your son is going through, right?
Right, in different schools, this is a school here in Rankin County, and it's a lot like that. But a school in high school that John was attending in Indiana, the counselors there were totally different. It all depends on the school district and how receptive that they are. Some teachers are like, oh, we're going to have a big problem with this child because his mother has Alzheimer's. You know, you have to make that decision whether you're going to disclose that the mother or father has this disease to those people that are trying to teach your children. And it's a call that you really have to think about.
Right. And did you disclose Kimberly's diagnosis to your children's school then?
Yeah, when I first moved to Mississippi, I did that. And I often wonder if that may not have been a mistake in some ways, because I think the right answer would have been to approach it differently. That's why I wrote this book, is to create a handbook to hand off to people and say, these are the things that happen and here are the things that can help you. So you have to be very careful in terms of what you want it's a tough call, depending on the age of your children. Now, a teenager is a little bit different. Some children, no matter what, they're going to go the right way. Others, they're influenced by peer pressure. I've been through it all: teenage pregnancies, attempted suicides, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, name it. With children, I've dealt with it. And I go over this in the book too, with various stories. And it's not doom and gloom. There's a lot of funny stories in there too, and a lot of good information that can help other people.
Right. And one of the very heartwarming stories that you talk about in the book is, you and, and Carl. Can you tell us a little bit about that story and how important Carl has been to you? Who is Carl? And yeah.
Carl was, okay, fast forward, by the time I landed in Topeka, Kansas, Kimberly was having problems breathing, and she ended up in a nursing home in about 45 miles away. Well, I was going to a church, I can't remember, Methodist Church in Topeka, one of the larger ones, and they had a program where they match you up with somebody that had a similar experience. They matched me up with Carl, and he was very helpful. And during that particular time,
this is the Stephen Minister program?
Yes, Stephen Ministry, that's right. In that particular time, I was so stressed out. Stress is something that you better deal with. And I ended up with a grand mal seizure because of all the stress, partly. And if it wasn't for Carl, I don't know what I would have done, but he helped take me, with all kind of things that I couldn't drive for 6 months and all. I'm not sure that's the story you're referring to, but he was my mentor, and every Saturday we would have breakfast, and he would just listen. Having somebody just listening will make a huge difference. So find somebody that can mentor you through this. Back to the original question on the children. When I first moved to Mississippi, I saw a counselor, and they gave me 3 choices. 1, I could keep my children in the home. 2, I could send them off with some relatives because they were still young enough. Or 3, I could put Kim away. I chose to do it all. You have to evaluate the situation and decide what you want to do. And it's not easy. So hopefully the book will help give you some insight.
Right. And, the story about Carl, right? You talk about the importance of having a confidant throughout this whole journey, right? Like, that's just so important to have anyone, just someone who can listen to you and talk to you through things, right? And that's why
Carl absolutely
is so important. And yeah.
It's critical. You have to have somebody that you can, because you feel so isolated. COVID is bad, but I can imagine the people who are dealing with COVID and are dealing with a 36-hour a day with somebody with Alzheimer's asking, do you have my cigarettes? Can I have my cigarettes? Are you going to work today? I really need a cigarette. Where are my cigarettes? On and on and on, over and over and over. Or she'll get in the car and run off in the car, and then the next thing you know, your car's missing, but she's there. Somehow she made herself back home. It's just insanity on steroids is what I call it. But there's hope. That's why there's hope, faith, and love. And the most important thing is love. I couldn't imagine if I had divorced her where she would be. I wonder how many people that are homeless are that way because they didn't have the opportunity to have somebody to care for them.
Right. And another nice story from the book is your trip to New York. Was it with the organization Inheritance of Hope?
Yes. One of the things I would strongly recommend is if you have children or even yourself, even now, I see a counselor every week just to talk to them. So there's 2 things to that. Went to see the counselor, and that's one of the things I took my boys to every, once a week in Jackson. We make the trip all the way down there, 20 miles and back. And she said, let's just see what's out there. So we Googled, and we found a program that would take families with the terminal parent, children 18 or under, and give them a vacation, all expensive vacation. No questions asked. So I never won anything in my life. So I filled out the paperwork, and lo and behold, in 2012, Kim had finished her last radiation treatment. There was a choice there to have her lung removed or have radiation or do nothing. I couldn't imagine trying to keep her, cut open. That's that's all in the book. So we went on to New York, and having that on her last day alive, I remember she was having problems breathing, her oxygen level, she was on morphine. And I mentioned New York City, and something about the human brain, it burned in her psyche, her brain, whatever, her crystal palace, whatever you want to call it, that experience. And I got the grin dinger in Texas when I mentioned New York City anytime. I would recommend anybody that's going through this, you can't equate brains with money. If you get all your affairs in order, do what you can, go on these kind of trips. One of the things I did is I gave a keynote presentation on a trip like this on the Caribbean on a cruise. It was a inaugural cruise planners did, it's the name of the company. And they asked me to be the keynote speaker, and they had RN nurses. So do what you can do in your life. Get all your financials, get all the things done first. So when the curtain falls, you don't have to worry about it. Enjoy each moment that you have.
Right. So on the last day of Kimberly's life, you actually mentioned New York City, and she gave you the grin, which told you that that experience was etched in her memory, and
absolutely
you remembered despite her Alzheimer's.
Absolutely, it was.
Yeah. And the cruise that you were just talking about, that was a recent trip that you did, right?
That was back in November, on my Facebook page, and I have a Living with Thunder deal, but I have pictures of that and information about that. But it was a cruise we did from Fort Lauderdale down to Panama Canal and up through. What was really interesting about that trip is that I also helped with the caregiving part. They had registered nurse felt. It's about 20 of us. And I gave a presentation of what I call the common sense 4 principle for healthy caregiving. And that is stress management, exercise, nutrition, and continuous learning. That goes for really anything. If you do those 4 things, you're going to get through fine. But stress will kill you. 65% of caregivers die before the people they're taking care of. Now, as far as what I would tell you about that trip is that I saw a person, helped a person from when Kim was very angry and trying to deal with a guy that would walk around the ship, and he would open closets and look at the electronics and tell me that, you can get the picture, to a lady that was very calm. It really touched my heart, and being able to help those people and give them encouragement made a difference, I believe. So I would definitely say do that.
Right. So was that cruise trip for caregivers and people under their care? That was
Yes, it was for the caregivers, to give them respite, and also for the ones that were there. So the range was people in wheelchairs to people could get around, but they would get, you had to watch them. So it gave during there was programming during the day. It was an 8-day cruise. So during the day, we had programs where we would keep busy the ones that had the challenge, and give a break to whomever would like to go swimming or play bingo, whatever it is that was offered on the trip. Or in Panama, we went out on some excursions. It was really nice.
And I think your point, your broader point is that, keep making these great memories, like go on, if you're able to, like go on a cruise trip like that, or go to New York City like you did, right? To keep making those great memories in the family, right? During this journey.
Your life doesn't have to end just because you're taking care of somebody. I'm not sure if if you'd like me to elaborate on some recommendations. But I would say that one of the things that you should do is take care of yourself first. That's why there are those 4 principles. If somebody wants to offer you help, hey, what can I do? You can't be prideful in this. You just have a list in your pocket of things that somebody can help you with and hand it out. Accept help. Don't be too good to accept help that if people want to offer. They do want to help. They just don't understand what to do. So it's your job to make up a list of what they cut the yard, go grocery shopping for them, sit down, hey, just come over and visit. Some of the things that we got early on about Kim, we got kind of treated in some ways like it was contagious. I can't really put my finger on it. I can elaborate a little bit more to anybody who would like to know, but there was some of that. I think there will always be some of that where people think, wonder if that's contagious, but it's not contagious. It's a very relentless, horrible disease that can happen to anybody, and people as young as 29 can get it. And it strikes 20 years earlier than when it's first diagnosed.
Right. And yeah, we, on Being Patient, one of these interviews, we talked to a mother who is a caregiver to her daughter with frontotemporal dementia. And her daughter was diagnosed at the age of 29, right? So dementia is not strictly an old person's illness, right? It can affect people of all ages, right? And like Kim too, at the age in her 40s, right? So, but yeah, I mean, that's a good point too, is, on the importance of self-care. Like, last week I did an interview with a caregiver whose late wife had frontotemporal dementia. And one of the things he mentioned that, like, that's one thing that, many caregivers struggle with is self-care. And but sometimes, like, he mentioned that self-care is just, taking a 3 count and a breath, right, and then continuing, right? It's just taking that moment to pause and to take a breath for yourself, right? And that can be self-care. So,
and this is very important, that when you're thinking about that, stress is just like when you have a situation where chemicals in the brain are released. The same thing happens with stress or anything that euphoric feelings or whatever. You want to manage your stress. Good, some stress is good, but constantly 36 hours a day is not good for anybody. And children, that's one of the things I have to wrestle with. My guilt about my children is that I don't know what I could have done differently. That's important to manage the areas in your life that need addressing. And if you do have children, get them involved in something like church or something, but be sure to ask questions. And for example, one case, John was coming out of the woods with this guy that he was about 14 and this guy was about 15. He's probably about 6'2", weighed about 200 pounds, big fella, had a big tattoo on his leg. I questioned John. I said, John, what are you doing hanging around this guy? Don't do it anymore. Later, I found out that when John would disappear and go visit with this guy, it's not knowing who the kids are, it's the parents. So they're out smoking weed with the parents in the garage. So you can't really, it's hard to juggle when you have a person that you're dealing with, your wife or your husband and children. So keep them involved in something healthy and get people to help you manage your children. It's a community thing, really. But COVID, in some ways, COVID has messed up a lot of things, but in some ways, it's helped with this technology that we're seeing today. I don't know the answer, but some of those areas I do cover in my book.
Right. And on that note, yeah, I have a quote, I think, that builds on your point about, like, talk to your children and ask questions. I think it builds on that point. And, you wrote that, I quote, like, all families should communicate. The disease is so insidious, there are no clear-cut lines to determine when and what to do next. No person and no thing are to blame. You must work as a team, right? And right. And so I think that's a good point, right? But it's very hard to do in practice when when you're dealing with a terminal illness and with different family members, that can be so hard to do, is to work as a team, right? So yeah.
The disease, the inspiration for this book is basically was a guidebook for those entering or traveling or having faced the curtain call. The idea is to say, here, take this book and read it. And it will cover a lot of the entire gauntlet from the beginning of this insanity, managing your career, your children, the doctors, Medicaid, Social Security, to the end of life issues. So the title of the book was inspired by learning to live moment by moment, not hour by hour, day by day, or week by week, but the moment by moment, living with thunder. You never know when or where or the frequency lightning would strike. So living with Alzheimer's is like living with insanity on steroids, 36 hours a day. The lightning is the chaos involved, and you just never know.
Right. And yeah, is there anything else you'd like to add with our audience?
I would say that my passion, the reason why I have the passion I do is because I don't want anybody to go through what I did. There was times in my life when I was dealing with this disease, and I talk about this in my book, and honestly, the truth is I would have put a bullet through my head if I not had my faith. It's important to have faith and know that this too will pass, and to take care of all the things up front. People often want to know if they're going to get the disease or not. If they go get tested and they say, "Oh, I have the," and I might make some people aggravated at me by saying this, but I'm gonna say it anyway. At the end of the day, do you really want to know what you really don't want to know? So if you get the markers and you have the propensity to get Alzheimer's, don't stress out about it. Take care of all your financial stuff. Look at Medicaid, look at Social Security, take care of all those things, and then go on with your life. Because all that stress is going to do with your worry about that is going to bring all of these things coming down on you like a ton of bricks on your head. And you don't just let the stress go. Stress, I promise, will bring this on quicker if you just leave it alone and enjoy your life. That's what I would say. And I hope the book will help people, and I really believe that it will. The 4 principles I said is like a 4-wheel vehicle: stress management, exercise, nutrition, and continuous learning. Any kind of factor where the tire is a little low in one area, don't worry about it. Just keep going down the road. You'll fix it later.
And
it'll be fine.
You mentioned that, what kept you afloat was your faith, right? And, so what was that faith specifically? What is that faith?
My faith is John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believe in him should not perish but have everlasting life. That's my faith. And I'm a believer. You got to believe in something or you'll fall for anything. The other things that I would like to say real quick, if you have a diagnosis with this, it's really important to get a good doctor that you can work with, and know that you can't do it all, and just take day by day. So those are kind of, there's other things that I wrote like pages here, but I can't do it all. I mean, I can only offer that if somebody wants to know, read the book and then fire away questions. I don't mind. It's kind of a passion to me to help other people. I'm not hawking a book. If you've read the book, it's not about trying to sell a book. It's about truly handing somebody a guidebook that will help them. And I try to cover all aspects.
Right. And yeah, and thank you so much for sharing such intimate and private stories from your family's life. I think an important thing is that when people read it, like they know that whatever they're going through, they're not alone. That there are other people out there like yourself who have been through the whole gauntlet. So
That was and is the inspiration. In fact, where I worked, the plant manager was reading the book and got about halfway through it. And this is just a comment she said. She said, "I took a lot of courage to write that about your family." And it did. I spoke with my children because it's raw truth. There's nothing hidden or made up about this. I mean, how do you tell somebody that some of the things I say in the book about my own children and what I went through? How do you say, "Oh, well, we went to church and my wife said she had to pee, so she peed right there in the parking lot"? What do you do about that?
And I think my last question is then, how are your three children doing today then?
They are doing fantastic. For a while, I wondered, but they're doing very well. They're 30 and 28. Like I said, and John turns 24 to 27. They're doing well. John wants to be a counselor, actually. He's looking at like to be a counselor. He has some things to go through, but they're all doing well. And I don't think I wish I could have made it different and better for them somehow. But steel sharpens steel. It's like a sword. When you forge a sword, you got to put it through the fire. Then you douse it in water, and then you take it out and you bang on it. You put it back through the fire again. Well, you take it out of the fire, you bang on it, and you just sharpen it that way. And I think that they've done well. I'm very proud of them. And we talked about this book, and they accepted it to help other people. That's the whole reason, to help other people.
Right. And how about yourself now? Several years after the passing of Kimberly, and all the stresses and challenges that you yourself went through. How are you doing today then?
I really appreciate that question. I'm a little bit shy about answering that, but I will say that I have my moments. It's like resistance, and you push and you push and push, and then there's no resistance anymore. The day that Kim passed away, it was at times like the day my world, because my whole world, I gave up my career to help her and to help my family through this. And then it was over, it's over. And there's no do-overs in life. So if you have an unresolved issue with somebody in your life, tell them you love them, work it out. For me, I'm trying to help other people. And when I get a comment about taking the story to the level I did from someone that says, "Hey, it was very courageous of you to do this," it's kind of, well, oh, well. But it is true. It took some guts to do this. At the same time, I want to help other people. And maybe that's my calling, just to help other people. COVID's messed up a lot of things on what I wanted to do, but you're helping by doing this program, and I hope that you're doing. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing well, and yeah, I think like yourself too. When readers and our audience make a comment about some of the interviews we do and some of the articles we write about, how, oh, I'm so glad that you interviewed them because I can totally relate to their experience. I think that for me just makes it all worth it, because again, back to my point earlier, I think it's so important for people to realize that they're not alone, because it can be very isolating. So
how am I doing? I want to say this. I am contemplating on writing another part of the book. I wrote like 700 pages. This book is only 165 pages from the original manuscript that I elaborated on. I'm also in the car. I talk about a Ranchero. That was her car. I want to get a Ranchero, a Falcon, and a station wagon and call them Faith, Hope, and Love, and kind of tour around the country with it. That's what I would love. That's kind of like my inner goal. So I'm learning to paint a car. I'm working, still working, and I'd like to do presentations around the country to help other people with these 4 principles. I'm a believer, and my presentation is not a sad one or anything. It's all humorous stories out of the book. I'm doing some brain research with the Mind Center in Mississippi, and I'm fascinated. I believe Alzheimer's, when it comes down to it, it's a water problem. So what you have, your brain, and you have the liquid, the cerebral spinal fluid that's in there is 150 milliliters, but that fluid is replaced 4 times a day with 650. So I think the problem is within that factor, the CSF fluid, that it's contaminated. Anyway, I'm busy.
Yeah.
I'm busy.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that we're able to help you extend, help you with your mission of doing presentations about your own experience and your own advice. And I think on that note, I'm just reading a comment from one of our audience, Barbara O'Brien. She said, "Thank you, Joe and Nicholas. I have a sister with dementia who lives 1,000 miles away from me." And so, yeah, I think, and you're welcome, Barbara. And we're both very happy to be here to share Joe's
Love is the answer. Forget about everything. Love is the final answer. I mean, remember this. When Kim was driving me crazy, and I thought, oh my gosh, this woman's put me $30,000 in debt. What in the heck? We're fighting like crazy. I mean, my daughter and I had to go to the attic because she raised, I don't want to use a bad word, she raised so much craziness one night, we just had to evacuate in another part of the house where she couldn't find us. It was just crazy. And so what I want to say about that is that at the end of the day, I remember the day that I told her I was going to marry her, and I swore, I made a vow to death do us part. That didn't mean when the water got hot, I would just leave. It meant in sickness and health. I believe if people, when they make that vow and they say, I'm going to marry this person, if they do that and they remember that the day that they got married, then we wouldn't have so many divorces and so much craziness in this world. So love is the answer, is my opinion. And remember the day that you got married.
Well, thank you, Joe, again for your time. And for our audience, if you missed any of our live talks, the video of this live talk, this video will be uploaded to YouTube so you can watch the recording. And if you haven't signed up to our newsletter, don't forget to sign up on our website. Thank you all. Bye.